Welcome to our show once again. I'm Mr. Smith, the Headmaster, and today's an opportunity for student feedback, and we have a number of students here today with some student issues and questions as it relates to school culture. So why don't we welcome today's guests.
I'm Sarah. I'm a senior.
I'm Ben. I'm a senior.
I'm Graham. I'm a senior.
I'm Tara. I'm a senior.
Well, welcome, folks, and I know that we have some questions that we'd like to ask. Certainly the first one I know is probably on the minds of a lot of people, and that's the question about lockdown and safety, correct?
Yeah, so last week, the lockdown, following right after the Las Vegas shooting, will there be cameras on campus, anything added to the safety plan?
Yeah, so obviously, it was a real lockdown,
Yep.
and we received a report from the Dover police that there was somebody in the neighborhoods adjacent to the administration building, and they saw somebody with a gun. Person jogging by, I think, reported that, and as a result, out of abundance of caution, we went into a lockdown because they didn't really know the circumstances of what was happening. As it turned out, it was somebody who had a pellet gun, and they were shooting squirrels or chipmunks in their yard or something, which, within their yard is legal. I don't know if at one point they were up on the road or whatever the case may be, but I'm glad that we did do what we did in going into the lockdown, just because, unfortunately, in this day and age, we don't know, and it's better to be safe. And, of course, falling right on the heels of the terrible tragedy in Las Vegas, I think that everyone was at an all-time high in terms of anxiousness. So the lockdown itself, just really quick, went really well, actually. We were able to lock our entire building. The majority of our building, other than some of our front doors, are already locked, which is good. And yes, we are looking at some additional safety features. Last year, in my school improvement plan, I asked the district to look into the potential for cameras, mostly out in our student parking lot and our teacher parking lot. I have no interest in putting cameras on inside the building. I think that that's probably going, way too far. But I do think some additional cameras on the outside, they could be helpful for us just to eliminate any potential issues, and then also could be helpful for the Dover police if there's somebody that they saw, a suspicious vehicle. I think a couple of years ago we had cases where a number of local high schools cars were being broken into, and as it turned out, one school did have cameras in their parking lot. They were able to identify who the kids were from another school by sending through a group email, and those people were prosecuted. So the cameras aren't just for real serious situations. They can also sort of help with just overall protection of your cars, our property, etc. In addition, we are looking at other means which we can notify people of incidents taking place. Strobe lights, for example, in some of our other areas like music, the cafeteria, the tech engineering spaces, because if you have your machines going, it's very hard to hear the announcements. So that's going to be done within the month. Faculty already have a series of keys that enable them to lock doors at any place, no matter where they are. So yes, we're definitely looking at some additional features. The difficulty we have is we're an open campus, and because our students travel to more than one building, in some of these high schools it's quite easy to just lock the building down because it's one complex. It's a little more complicated here, but that being said, the superintendent and I met last week, and we're talking about the potential for a feasibility study looking at our school, almost like a small college campus, because colleges, have to have systems in place where, we would get feedback from law enforcement, feedback maybe from local colleges as to things that they do to monitor and to maintain safety. But, one of the best ways, obviously, if you see something, say something. It's true. It's a phrase that I think sometimes is joked about, but it really can have a major impact. And in this case here, somebody within the community saw something that just didn't think was right, and it was good that the police investigated it, and it turned out that it wasn't a real threat. But had she not, who knows? So that's kind of where we are with that, but we do take that quite seriously, and I think that as we continue to move forward, we'll look at some additional measures. We'd even consider things like scan cards, where all of you would have your own student ID and you could scan it as you come through. We've talked about the potential of locking our front doors between classes, and then when classes are passing, the doors would then be open. This won't prevent or allow for everything to be safe 24/7, but it's definitely steps in the right direction, and know that we're really serious about that. What else do we have?
So obviously there's been work done in the library, changing it around, and it's been going on for a while. I was told I was going to be finished in September, but obviously that's not the case. And it's limiting library spots during DR, so we're wondering when will this work be complete?
Yeah, it's a good point. I really appreciate the student body for their flexibility and their patience as we go through this. So over the summer, a lot of this was supposed to have been done, but then we had some fire panel issues, so we had to have our electricians working on those because there's a safety concern first. So that pulled some of our workforce away from that. We are planning by the end of this month to have everything completed, in which case we'll be able to go back to our full allotment of 50, which will give a lot more students flexibility. Some of it was just arranging and making sure that furniture had arrived, and the other part of it was making sure all the electrical pieces were done. So we're hoping that really within the next couple of weeks that's all solved and we'll be able to have full access to the library. We think it'll be good. We think that the benches over time will become popular. You can plug your phones in, you can charge your laptops, just some things that are small but we think are meaningful. The open concept in the middle of the library actually worked very effectively on Friday for our Arts Homecoming, where we could have presenters speak and students, and it didn't require a lot of moving of things, so that was positive. We have a TV monitor that's going to be installed within the next week or so that will have a number of student announcements, but also Mr. Butterworth is looking to have other library-related things up there in case you're looking for research or resources. We have all new desktops in the library, new chairs, new computer, laptop, tables. So there's a number of things that the Dover Sherborne Education Foundation has funded, and we're just putting some of the final touches, with the final piece being a giant fish tank as you come into the library that was donated by alumni Peter Phelan, and we've got a number of students who will be working on that. So within a couple of weeks we should get back to normal and have our full allotment of students.
Sounds good.
With the discovery of a VPN that has been now blocked and obviously encouraged not to have by students here, we were just wondering, obviously there are classes like social media and other educational classes that use Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, but I think the question that we have is, why are other apps blocked in comparison to others?
It's an excellent question. So at the end of last year, new legislation came out for the state of Massachusetts that required us to actually no longer support apps in which student information was being resold or reissued. So for example, information that might be placed on logins or things of that sort with particular apps, if that information is now being transferred to a third party for other marketing tools, advertisements, potentially ways in which they can get you to purchase products, we as a public school in Massachusetts are no longer allowed to have such applications. If these apps sign this release promising that they're not going to do that, then we can do that, but some of these apps have not done such. They have not turned over or acknowledge that they will not resell the name.
So the apps that are unblocked have signed that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that's correct. And then in time, if more of these apps feel that pressure to do so, then obviously we'll open it up. But this was strictly a legal piece, and we have a legal right under FERPA to protect your information and your data, and that's why some of these apps have not signed off on that, because they do resell your information.
Right.
We can't use those right now.
Another problem students have been talking about is just the inconsistency with the heating and air conditioning throughout the school. And a lot of people think, like, in the math wing it's really cold, in the history wing it's really hot, so, like, is there any possibility of trying to do something
Yeah,
like that?
and you're absolutely right. We've had some real inconsistencies. So back in 2004, when this building was renovated, they put a whole new HVAC system in, which HVAC is basically the heating and cooling, right? So and a lot of the system draws fresh air, so if the temperatures are at a certain level, whether it's too low or too high, it will shut certain vents off and then bring in warm air in the winter and then turn the AC on in the summer or the warmer months of the fall. And balancing of some of these systems has been problematic. We have a contract with a couple different companies, and we've had them in here frequently, and you're absolutely right. I've noticed actually over the last couple of years, I think the balancing has been even more problematic. We have addressed this with the Director of Facilities. He is well aware. He's had people on site frequently. Some of this is just maintenance, where these systems are going to go down, and some of it is just the general control board. I know that they're looking at a whole new computer system to run this system. The system on campus is controlled by basically a computer that allows for facilities director and the head custodians to see every single room, what the temperature is reading, how much air is coming in, all of that. And there's some discussion around putting in for a capital request, which would come through the town budget, not the school budget, for a whole new board, which would allow for greater balancing. So it is an issue. I know that the teachers are feeling it, we're feeling it. My office sometimes in the fall has no air coming in when the rest of the building is air conditioned. My own office is, so I'm feeling it myself and can certainly sympathize with you. And then we've got other spaces that are freezing. So our head custodian, Mr. Bogan, is constantly working on it. Some of it goes beyond his authority, and some of it comes to the facilities authority. But Mr. Kelly, who's our facilities director, has been made well aware, as has the superintendent, that we're seeing really imbalanced numbers when you go to math, or then you go to social studies, and it's a change. The rooms are really set between 68 and 72, is where they should be, and sometimes we're seeing readings of 66, sometimes we're seeing readings of 74, 75. And once you get that temperature at those different points, it's noticeably different. So if you've got a room that's 75, another room that's 68, and you walk from one to the other, you notice it. It's considerable. So certainly it's frustrating, and I know that they are looking at it. Anything else?
Do you have any comment about the FanZone?
Yeah, I do actually. So, I love the concept of our student body coming out to support our athletes. And I will once again stress it shouldn't just be in football. I think that that's sometimes what it defaults to, which I think it's unfortunate. I do get during the week some of our teams are playing at the same time, so it does become hard. That being said, I wish we had more participants at all of our contests. Now, in terms of the fan zone, where my concerns lie is when we kind of cross a line and make it personal to our opponents. I was not at Friday's game, but I was at the previous home game, and we had to ask a couple people to leave because of vulgar language. Keep in mind, we got a lot of young kids running around at these games, a lot of parents, a lot of grandparents there. It's just not appropriate. Now, I know that sometimes in college stadiums and in pro stadiums, we might see behavior that might be similar. That's a little different. We are still a high school. These are amateur athletes, and I think that we have to keep that focus on it, that these kids are doing the very best that they can do. And just the name calling or the personalization to our opponents, to me, it's just unnecessary. I think if you're a high school athlete and your team is losing, you're pretty smart. You know your team is losing. And it just doesn't need to be reminded by 200 people, winning team, losing team, and all of that stuff. We heard some comments in reference to Medway, referring to it as Spedway. Totally inappropriate. Insulting really to Medway, but also insulting, I think, to kids in our own school who have special education services. I know that there were some other things that were thrown out there. A couple games back, we had the baby powder thing, and I know that we see that in some stadiums and other places, but the problem is in our close proximity, people were getting it in their mouths, it was getting in their nose. It's an allergy problem, and then in the end, who ends up cleaning up? Our groundskeeper. It just doesn't seem right. I think we can do things better. I think for the most part, a lot of our stuff is really positive, and it's good loud cheering and support for our teams. But I think we crossed the line. I actually think sometimes some of our student body gets bored. And the second half, that's where things tend to sort of go downhill. I know that we asked Friday night some people to leave, and then some people then proceeded to go to the Medway side of the bench, fan zone. There's just no excuse for that. There really isn't, just because this is high school athletics, and I think we take it way too seriously if we start getting to that point It should be about going to a game with your friends, having fun, cheering on your peers, but not making a mockery of the other team, because they're doing the very best they can. And in some games when, we're on the winning side, it's easy to cheer, but when we're on the losing side of things, and we have been in some sports in some years, it doesn't feel great. So I just would really stress to our student body that our fan zone right now has some work to do, and I think that they've got to come back with a focus of positive cheers, which there are plenty of them, and a positive focus instead of making it contested towards your opponent and their cheerleaders and their players and their coaches and their parents. We can do better than that at Dover Sherborne, and I don't think we need to stoop that low.
Is there going to be any sort of punishment, considering the whole entire fan zone was ejected?
Well, I think that there's going to be some things that we're going to put into place as an administration to ensure that there's greater visibility of administrators, game officials, and that sort. Some students will be removed for the next few games for sure, and some already have, and some more will. And, we just can't tolerate that. As I said, I think the majority of our fan zone acts appropriate. I think some people spur them on to do some things that cross the line, and they know that. And because they're in a large crowd, they feel like they can yell stuff out and hide. I see that as kind of cowardly, actually. And I would much rather just see them cheer for their team and be supportive of their team instead of making it about the opponent. What we exactly are going to do, we'll talk about over the next few days. But frankly, I'd also like to see some of our student body out at some of our other contests, not just football.
Are there rules like across the TVL regarding fans, or is this?
Yeah, there
specific
are.
to Dover
There are.
Sherborne?
And you raise a good question, because sometimes you might even see another team, another school, do something that then we don't allow that, and that's hard. I get it for students, but sometimes, yes, there are general rules, like the things like baby powder and the noisemakers and all that. Those are MIAA. We're just not supposed to across the whole state. Then there are some that are TVL related, and I know that Mr. Parcells and I will make sure that our student body is made aware of what those are. And then some we just think are just good, positive behaviors that we think Dover Sherborne kids should have. We think highly of you guys, and we want a positive environment. We want you guys to come out for games. It's just some of the things we're hearing from some, and I want to stress some, because I'm not saying the whole fan zone is doing this, are crossing a line and are just inappropriate. And, use of vulgar language when you've got grandparents and kids and, all sorts of people there, it's just not acceptable. If you're talking privately with your friends and you use that language, well, I guess that's your right. But in a public institution like a football game, or say it's a playoff soccer game, that language just doesn't have any place. You wouldn't do it in a classroom, and really, that's an extension of the classroom, so, why do it out there? Sound fair?
Yes.
So we want to work with you guys, and as I said, I know that at times it may be frustrating if you see another school do something and that's not something we allow. I think I'm pretty flexible, but I think when it becomes personal is when I say, guys, we gotta do something here. We gotta scale something back. So we're not banning the fan zone. We're not doing anything crazy like that. Instead, we're going to hope to kind of educate and work and clarify, and as a result, we hope that for the next home football game we can have really positive turnout and not see some of the repeated behaviors we saw last Friday.
The bleachers,
Yep.
I know like a few of them are dented.
Yeah, so we've repaired 2 or 3 of them already, and unfortunately those are not meant to be stood on. They're meant to be sat on. And so when students are jumping up and down, right, which we really haven't said or done anything about, the problem with it is it bends them, because they're just not designed for that. They're not that kind of bleacher. And, so I think that we may have to in the future look at something where, we don't have kids standing. Instead, we have kids, if you want to stand, you stand along the fence line or something, because it's costing the district, and every time we have to repair those benches, it's just costing more and more money. We've done it to this point. We've roped off a couple because we're waiting for a new shipment of some benches to come in. Just know that those bleachers were not designed for that. Now, if we end up putting new bleachers in a few years or making some adjustments, obviously the type of bleacher they'll look at will be a much more reinforced bleacher, and that may solve that problem. But for now, the bleacher system that we have is meant for people to sit on, stand and jump on.
So the opposing team's bleachers, those things are a lot wider and more sturdier.
Mm-hmm.
And like, could we possibly switch ours with theirs?
Switch sides. You know, it's interesting. There's been some discussion of that. I think that the difficulty, would be how we communicate that. But, I suppose that's a possibility. We have talked about that as potentially something to look at. But then we also want to make sure that our opposing fans have an adequate space too.
Yeah.
So let's say some games it's not a problem. If it's a team traveling from a long way away, like the football playoff games, we don't tend to have big crowds coming in. But if it were Medfield or if it were Millis or whatever, somebody close, then you want to make sure they have enough space. But that has been talked about. Yeah. Yep.
Would that be like an easy fix? Is it like attached to anything, or is it more just like you can drag it and switch it out?
Well, the two bleacher systems, anytime you alter it now, it would have to now be ADA compliant. Those bleachers are not, so Americans with Disabilities Act. So the major bleachers that are connected to our press box and across the way, those are actually not ADA compliant because they don't have ramps and we don't have an elevator to get to them. They're grandfathered in prior to the new ADA codes, so the minute we were to alter them or move them from the site, we'd have to follow ADA, and that's for now why it hasn't happened. But it is in the capital plan for replacement bleachers, I believe, in a few years.
We're not here.
Right. Yes, correct.
Maybe while on the topic of athletics, is there any plans of like renovating the practice football field and then other fields such as the tennis courts and softball fields?
There is. So the athletic boosters are working with the athletic administration, my administration, and the school committee to look at what would be called Phase 2 of the renovation. Phase 1 was the North Searle Field and then some other adjustments that were made with that. Phase 2 would look at potentially including a 5th tennis court, which would be really important so that we could actually play all of our matches at once and so that we could also host tournament games. So they're looking at doing that. There's been everything from keeping the courts where they are and adding a 5th to moving all the courts to the Junction Street spot and creating a tennis complex there. And then the football practice field would be placed in a different location. They've also talked about putting irrigation where the current practice football field is, because it's not just the high school football team that uses it, youth uses it as well, and they pay fees. There's talk of a second turf field coming into play, which would be out on Farm Street. And they're looking at a configuration of which way it would go. In which case they would also upgrade what is currently now, some of you may not even know what field this is, but the JV softball field would be completely renovated, and that would be made the varsity softball field. And then the one that's right out in front of the middle school would then become the JV softball field, or like an additional practice spot. And the baseball field, which they've done some work on now that we moved to, would become the permanent spot, and they would do some upgrades. So there are discussions happening with athletic boosters and school committee. They've already had a couple meetings and discussing some fundraising opportunities, in which case, we would hope in the next couple of years, if not sooner, we could perhaps have additional fields that would help. We don't want to lose fields, so it really is delicate. And keep in mind, part of our complex abuts wetlands, and so there's a lot of code that you have to follow to make sure you can't just bring stuff in. We also have a gas line that goes along Perlmutter Pass, which is the road leading to the upper fields. We have to take that in consideration in terms of what you can put out there for the heavy trucks. So there's a lot of details that go into just renovating, obviously in addition to money, but I think that there's interest there. I think there's some funds there, and there's an appetite for the next phase of our athletic complex, which would be great. The key is Mr. Parcells wants to make sure that it benefits softball, baseball, that it benefits boys and girls soccer, boys and girls lacrosse, and tennis. He said this has to be a multi-sport renovation that's going to benefit all of those programs and not just a second turf field to benefit one or two programs. So yeah, their plans are underway, and we'll see, and then in a few years we'll also have to replace the turf on North Sorrel, because that has a life expectancy as well, and I think we have about another 5 to 6 years of that turf before it has to be removed. It won't be the same type of project because we already have the base layer and the sand and everything that's there, but the new turf that would have to go on would be different. Chances are it would be a sand composite and not the rubber pellets, which I'm sure some of the athletes would be happy with, because you don't get those pellets all over the place and all over you. There's a little bit more of an increased cost with that, but environmentally it's much more effective and wise. So there's a lot of different moving parts that have to happen with this, but there's a lot of conversations happening to try to improve our complex. We can't really do a whole lot with the upper fields, because there's a lot of space out there, but the problem is you have to be able to have parking once you go so far. And for us to put a turf field up top really wouldn't make any sense, because you can't bring any additional parking up there because of the gas line and the wetlands. So those fields are great for some practices. Obviously the cross-country course is great way out and back, but you can't build a whole lot up there because of the restrictions. That answers that. And I'll just leave with one thing, don't forget. Good news, right? We'll leave on a high note. This year, once again, we expect and we'll be reiterating to faculty that there should be no homework, no reading, nothing assigned for the Thanksgiving break. So that's something to kind of look forward to. I know that some of you are knee-deep in college applications and work, and hopefully those go well, and you'll have a nice Thanksgiving break to actually enjoy your friends and your family. All right. With that, we'll sign off. Thank you once again.
Thank you.